Emily Thompson was the kind of young woman who carried quiet strength in her eyes and a kindness that couldn't be taught. At just 24 years old, she had already known more hardship than most people twice her age. Raised by a single mother in a small town outside Des Moines, Iowa, Emily learned early on what it meant to work hard, go without, and never complain. Her mother, Mary, worked double shifts at the local diner just to put food on the table and keep the lights on in their modest two-bedroom home. After Mary passed away from a long illness, Emily moved to the city with nothing but an old suitcase, $200 in her wallet, and a dream of building a better life. She found a room in a shared apartment and took the first job she could get, sales associate at Valora Boutique, an upscale fashion store known for catering to the elite. Located in a ritzy part of town, just a few blocks from the downtown high-rises and luxury hotels, the boutique felt like another world. From day one, Emily was treated more like a background prop than a team member. Her manager, Vanessa Moore, was sharp-tongued and obsessed with status. She often reminded Emily that she didn't look the part for such a high-end establishment. While other employees were styled in designer heels and sleek handbags, Emily came to work in thrifted cardigans and the same 2 pairs of shoes she rotated every week. Instead of assisting customers, Emily was usually sent to do errands no one else wanted, fetching coffee, running to the dry cleaners, or scrubbing the stockroom floor on her hands and knees. Even when she managed to speak with a customer and close a sale, Vanessa would find a way to claim the commission for herself. "Be grateful you have a job at all," Vanessa would say, with a dismissive flick of her perfectly manicured hand. The other girls weren't much kinder. They laughed behind Emily's back, poked fun at her simple clothes, and often stole her clients by stepping in the moment a wealthy shopper walked through the door. Despite it all, Emily never argued. She needed the paycheck, small as it was, just enough to cover rent, groceries, and her monthly bus pass. She told herself every night that things would get better. They had to. She never expected a turning point would come in the form of a tired old man walking into the boutique with scuffed shoes, a wrinkled coat, and a gentle smile. But that simple act of kindness she chose in that moment, while others turned away, would change the course of her life in ways she never imagined. It was a crisp Thursday afternoon in late October, the kind of day when the sun glinted off the boutique's glass storefront, but the chill in the air hinted that winter wasn't far off. Inside Valora Boutique, soft classical music played beneath the hum of overhead lighting. Emily was neatly folding a stack of cashmere scarves on a display table near the front window, doing her best to stay invisible and out of trouble. The boutique was quiet, the way it usually was mid-afternoon. Vanessa and the other employees were gathered near the back, scrolling through their phones or gossiping about some local celebrity sighting. That's when the glass door opened with a soft chime, and a gust of cold air swept in, along with a figure who didn't quite fit the store's usual clientele. An elderly man, perhaps in his early 80s, stepped inside. He wore a worn tan overcoat that had clearly seen better days, shoes with frayed soles, and a dark green scarf that looked handmade. His silver hair was tousled from the wind, and his hands trembled slightly as he tucked the scarf closer to his chest. His eyes, however, clear and curious, took in the boutique like a man stepping into a museum. Vanessa looked up from behind the counter, and her expression instantly soured. "Excuse me, sir," she called out sharply. "This is a luxury boutique. We don't do donations here." The other girls snickered, whispering behind their hands. One even muttered, probably looking for a place to warm up. But Emily's heart tugged the moment she saw him. There was something familiar about the way he held himself, like a man who'd once stood tall and proud but had been knocked down by time and circumstance. Ignoring the cold stares of her coworkers, Emily walked gently toward him. "Good afternoon, sir," she said, offering a kind smile. "Would you like to sit down? I can get you a glass of water if you'd like." The old man looked startled by her warmth, then nodded slowly. "That would be lovely, thank you." Emily helped him to a velvet armchair in the waiting area and hurried to bring him a cold bottle of spring water from the employee fridge. She offered it with both hands and even placed a paper napkin on his knee, just as her mother used to do for guests when they were growing up. The man took a long sip, then looked at her with gratitude. "You're very kind," he said, his voice raspy but sincere. "Most people don't look twice at someone like me." Emily shook her head softly. "Everyone deserves kindness, sir." His eyes crinkled with a faint smile. "Good things happen to good people," he whispered, almost as if it were a secret blessing. She didn't know it then, but those simple words, in that simple moment, were about to change everything. Because the man sitting in the chair wasn't just any passerby. He was Walter Brooks, grandfather of Ethan Brooks, one of the most powerful men in the city. And Emily, in her humility, had just touched the heart of a man the world had long stopped seeing. When Walter Brooks stepped out of the Valora boutique that afternoon, a soft breeze caught the edge of his coat. He pulled it tighter and smiled to himself. The kindness he had just experienced from Emily, a complete stranger, warmed him more than the sunlight ever could. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to him with such sincerity, without assumption, without judgment. He hailed a yellow cab on the corner and gave the driver an address that made the man's eyebrows raise. "That's up in the Heights," the cabbie said, glancing at Walter in the rearview mirror. "Big houses up there." Walter simply nodded with a twinkle in his eye. "That's right, son. Big house. Big history." 20 minutes later, the cab turned onto Brookside Lane, a tree-lined private road that wound its way up to one of the most exclusive estates in the city. The mansion at the end, built from pale stone, complete with iron gates and a circular driveway, was the kind that appeared in architecture magazines or glossy fundraising galas. The kind of home where the landscaping was professionally trimmed every week and chandeliers glowed from every window. The driver pulled to a stop, wide-eyed. "Sir, is this your house?" Walter chuckled as he handed over a $50 bill for the $22 fare. "Keep the change," he said kindly, before stepping out onto the cobblestone path. Inside, the air smelled faintly of aged mahogany and blooming orchids. He walked across the gleaming hardwood floors, past family portraits and oil paintings, until he reached the great room. There stood Ethan Brooks, his grandson, the CEO of Door Group, a name known across Wall Street and the fashion world alike. Ethan turned, startled. "Grandpa, where have you been?" His tone mixed concern and irritation. "You've been gone all afternoon." Walter waved off the question with a small smile. "I was observing the world. Needed to remind myself what it's really like out there." Ethan frowned. "What happened?" And so, Walter told him everything, how he walked into a boutique wearing old clothes, how the staff treated him like garbage, and how one young woman, Emily, saw past his appearance and treated him like a human being. As he spoke, Ethan's expression darkened. "They treated you like that? In one of our stores?" Walter nodded slowly. "Yes. But she was different. That girl has something special, Ethan. Compassion. Grace. She didn't know who I was. She just saw someone in need and responded with heart." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That boutique is part of my company. If someone threw out my grandfather, they'll be answering for it." Walter placed a hand on his grandson's shoulder. "Before you act with anger, act with intention. Find her. Learn who she is. people like that don't come around often." And just like that, a single afternoon of kindness from a humble young woman had turned the attention of a billionaire toward her. Emily had no idea what doors she had just opened, or that the life she knew was about to change forever. The next morning, the city was just beginning to wake. Sunlight poured through the windows of Ethan Brooks' executive office on the 38th floor of the Door Group headquarters, casting a warm glow over the sleek walnut desk and leather-bound ledgers that lined the room. Ethan, normally focused on numbers, quarterly earnings, and international supply chain logistics, couldn't stop thinking about one thing, or rather, one person. Emily. His grandfather's words from the night before lingered in his mind like a melody he couldn't shake. People like that don't come around often. And Ethan knew Walter well. His grandfather didn't offer praise lightly. Without delay, Ethan called in his executive assistant, Michael, a well-organized man in his 40s who had been by Ethan's side for nearly a decade. "I need you to find someone," Ethan said, tapping the polished surface of his desk. "Her name is Emily Thompson. She works, or worked, at Valora Boutique. That's all we know." Michael nodded. "Consider it done, sir." By late afternoon, thanks to a few discreet phone calls and the help of a private security firm, they had a name, an address, and even footage from the boutique's internal security system. Ethan watched in silence as the video showed Emily offering Walter a glass of water, gently helping him to a chair, and slipping a few folded bills into his hand for a cap. "She didn't even hesitate," Ethan murmured, leaning back in his chair. "She thought he had nothing, and helped him anyway." Later that day, a black town car pulled up outside a modest two-story brick apartment building on the west side of the city. The driver stepped out and knocked on apartment 3B. Inside, Emily was folding laundry on her small kitchen table when she heard the knock. She opened the door cautiously, heart skipping a beat when she saw the sharply dressed man standing there. "Miss Thompson?" he asked, with a polite but professional tone. "My name is Michael Langley. I'm the executive assistant to Mr. Ethan Brooks, CEO of Door Group. Mr. Brooks would like to meet with you personally." Emily blinked, confused. I think you have the wrong person." "No, ma'am," he said gently. "He asked me to find you specifically." Emily hesitated. She had heard the name Ethan Brooks before. Who hadn't? He was in Forbes, on the news, on billboards, but why would a man like that want to see someone like her? After a few moments of indecision, Emily finally nodded. "Okay, just let me grab my coat." She stepped into the back seat of the luxury vehicle, her heart thudding with every passing block. As the car pulled through the towering iron gates of the Brooks estate, her eyes widened. This was no mistake. When the grand front door opened and she came face to face with Ethan Brooks himself, she realized that one act of kindness had led her straight into the center of a world she never imagined, and perhaps, into something far greater than she ever dreamed. The first time Emily saw Chloe Bennett, it was like watching a scene out of a movie. A sleek red convertible roared up the circular driveway of the Brooks estate, tires crunching against the gravel, engine still humming even after the key was turned. Out stepped a woman dressed in 4-inch stilettos, a cream-colored cashmere coat, and oversized sunglasses that did little to hide the scowl on her face. Emily had been helping Walter organize his collection of vintage books in the sunroom when the front door slammed open. The sound echoed through the marble hall like thunder. "Ethan!" Chloe called out in a voice that dripped with false sweetness and entitlement. Ethan appeared at the top of the staircase, calm as ever in a crisp navy suit. "Chloe," he said, his voice neutral. "What are you doing here?" Chloe barely acknowledged Emily, though her eyes lingered long enough to size her up. And in that single glance, Emily felt what it meant to be invisible to someone who believed themselves to be untouchable. "I came to see why I've been completely cut off from your schedule," Chloe said, crossing her arms. "No phone calls. No invitations. And now I hear you're spending time with some boutique girl?" Her tone made boutique girl sound like an insult. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Chloe, we haven't been together in over a year. You and I both know that." Chloe's smile faltered, but only for a second. "We may not have had a title, but everyone knows we're meant to be. Our families, our friends. You don't just replace someone like me with a nobody." Emily's breath caught. She wanted to say something, to defend herself, but the words stayed locked in her throat. "Her name is Emily," Ethan said calmly, stepping closer. "And she's not a nobody. She has more grace and kindness in one day than most people show in a lifetime." Chloe's eyes narrowed. "You're being ridiculous. She's poor, Ethan. She doesn't belong in this world." Before Ethan could reply, Walter entered the room, leaning lightly on his cane. "Money doesn't determine worth, young lady," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "And from what I've seen, Emily has more character than many people who were born with silver spoons in their mouths." The room fell into a stunned silence. Chloe's smile returned, colder than ever. "Well, enjoy your little charity project," she said with mock sweetness, then turned to leave, her heels clicking angrily against the marble floor. But she didn't leave quietly. Within days, rumors began to swirl, whispers in the corridors of Door Group that Emily had charmed her way into the Brooks family for status and wealth. Staff began to look at her differently. Online gossip forums hinted at a love triangle. Chloe had pulled the strings, knowing exactly how to plant doubt without getting her hands dirty. What she didn't realize was that while Emily was new to this world, she wasn't weak. And Ethan Brooks? He wasn't a man who let others destroy what he valued, not without a fight. The Brooks estate was quiet that evening, the kind of hush that blankets a home after tension has passed, but before peace has truly returned. Emily stood alone in the guest room she'd been offered, packing her things into a small canvas duffel bag. Her hands trembled as she folded her clothes with care, her heart heavy from the harsh whispers, the judgment, and Chloe's cruel insinuations that she didn't belong. She paused for a moment, pulling open the top drawer of the nightstand. At the back was something she hadn't touched in weeks, a folded handkerchief, cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery in the corner. It was worn from age but still soft, carefully mended at the seams. The initials stitched in navy thread read in T. The monogram of her late mother, Margaret Thompson. That handkerchief had once been a part of Emily's childhood. Her mother had used it to dab her tears when she was sick, to wrap cookies in when they had nothing else for a school snack, and once, to press into the palm of an elderly man who had helped them when their car broke down on a winter night decades ago. Emily held it to her chest and sighed, not realizing that this tiny item, threadbare and humble, was about to shift the tides of her entire story. The next morning, as Walter was enjoying his usual cup of Earl Grey in the library, he noticed something folded on the corner table near the staircase. A maid had picked it up from the guest room after Emily's quiet departure and set it aside, assuming it was part of the laundry. Curious, Walter reached over and opened the fabric carefully. And then he froze. His eyes locked on the initials, his weathered fingers brushing across the stitching as if trying to convince himself it was real. "MT," he whispered, almost reverently. It couldn't be. But deep in his memory, there it was, a snowy night, a stranded woman with a little girl on the side of a country road in Minnesota, an old Chevy with a flat tire, and the woman handing him a handkerchief with that very same monogram. She had thanked him profusely, calling him a guardian angel. Her daughter, wide-eyed, no more than 5, had clung to her coat, shivering in the cold. Walter sat back slowly, stunned. "Emily Thompson." He stood, the cane nearly slipping from his hand, and called out for Michael, Ethan's assistant. "Get me Ethan," he said. "Now." Within minutes, Ethan arrived. Walter held up the handkerchief with quiet reverence. "This belonged to her mother," he said. "I knew that name felt familiar. I helped this family once. Now her daughter is here helping us." Ethan's expression shifted from confusion to awe. "This isn't coincidence," Walter added softly. "This is grace." In a world ruled by contracts and boardrooms, it was easy to forget that life still moved in mysterious ways, and that sometimes, something as small as an old handkerchief could carry the weight of destiny. For days, the Brooks estate felt heavy with silence. Emily was gone. The air, once filled with light conversation and the gentle rhythm of Walter's cane tapping across marble floors, now felt hollow. Ethan, though still showing up for meetings and public appearances, wasn't himself. He hadn't been since she walked out the front door with her head held high, her eyes brimming with quiet pain. But Ethan wasn't a man to accept injustice lying down. And his grandfather's discovery of the handkerchief had sparked something deeper than suspicion. It confirmed a connection, a purpose, that couldn't be ignored. Ethan acted swiftly. First, he reviewed all internal footage from the Brooks estate from the night of the alleged theft, the very night Chloe had claimed Emily stole a priceless sapphire necklace. For hours, Ethan and his trusted assistant, Michael, combed through recordings from the hallways, the security camera near the private jewelry room, and the corridor leading to Emily's guest room. And then, there it was. At 1:42 a.m., Chloe appeared on screen. Dressed in black, she moved silently through the hallway, pausing to glance around before slipping into the family's secured jewelry chamber. She emerged moments later, something clutched in her hand, a gleam of light catching the shape of the missing necklace. She then crept down the hallway and entered Emily's room. The timestamp was clear. Her actions deliberate. There was no mistaking it. Ethan leaned back in his chair, jaw clenched. "She set her up," he said quietly. That afternoon, he gathered the family and key staff in the great room, Walter, his mother Catherine, and a handful of employees who had been present during the initial accusation. Chloe, still playing the part of the heartbroken socialite, arrived late, her heels echoing confidently across the polished floor. "What's this all about?" she asked sweetly, brushing imaginary lint from her designer blazer. Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he pressed a small button on the remote in his hand. The flat-screen television flickered to life, displaying the clear footage, Chloe sneaking through the mansion, stealing the necklace, and planting it in Emily's room. Gasps echoed across the room. Catherine, who had once doubted Emily's character, turned pale. Walter closed his eyes, shaking his head slowly. "Is this your idea of a joke?" Chloe demanded, her voice rising. Ethan's reply was calm but firm. "No, Chloe. This is evidence." "You think this proves something?" "That I did it," she stammered. Michael stepped forward. "We also traced your login to the security system. You disabled the motion sensors for 15 minutes, just enough time to do what you did." Chloe's face crumbled. "You tried to ruin someone good," Ethan said, his voice tinged with disappointment. "You crossed a line. And now you're going to face the consequences." By evening, Chloe had been escorted off the property, her reputation in tatters, her access to the Brooks family permanently revoked. And though Emily wasn't there to see it, justice had finally arrived. The truth, long buried beneath wealth and jealousy, had come to light, proving that even in a world full of pretense, character still mattered more than appearances. After the truth about Chloe was revealed and justice had been served, there was still one more bridge to mend, the one between Emily and Ethan's mother, Catherine Brooks. Catherine had always been a woman of elegance and discipline. The daughter of a U.S. senator and the widow of a successful business tycoon, she was used to a life where appearances mattered and reputations were carefully maintained. Her love for Ethan was undeniable, but it was often wrapped in layers of tradition and expectation. In her mind, Ethan's future wife would come from a certain circle, well-educated, well-connected, and certainly not a former sales associate from a boutique. But after witnessing the deception Chloe had spun, and the grace with which Emily had handled herself throughout the ordeal, Catherine found herself rethinking everything she thought she knew about character, class, and worth. One rainy Sunday afternoon, Catherine asked Walter to join her in the sitting room. She wore a simple navy cardigan and pearls, her usual confidence giving way to quiet contemplation. "I misjudged her," she said, her voice soft but resolute. Walter sipped his tea, watching his daughter-in-law over the rim of his cup. "Emily never once asked for anything," he replied. "She helped me when she thought I was just a poor old man." "That kind of heart is rare, Catherine." Catherine nodded slowly. "I saw the handkerchief," she added. "I remember Margaret Thompson. I met her once at a charity auction years ago. She was a good woman." "She raised a good daughter," Walter said. That same day, Catherine asked Michael to arrange a private meeting with Emily. The young woman had returned to her small apartment after everything unfolded, still unsure whether she belonged in the Brooks world, despite all that had come to light. When Emily opened the door and saw Mrs. Brooks standing there, holding an umbrella and a handbag that likely cost more than Emily's entire monthly rent, she froze. "Mrs. Brooks." Catherine gave her a warm but reserved smile. "May I come in, Emily?" Emily nodded, stepping aside. They sat across from one another at the tiny kitchen table, the scent of rain drifting through the open window. "I owe you an apology," Catherine began. "I was wrong about you. About your intentions. I judged you by your circumstances, not your heart, and for that, I am truly sorry." Emily's eyes welled with tears, but she remained composed. "Thank you, ma'am. That means a lot. I would like to be part of your life, if you'll allow it," Catherine added gently. "And if, one day, you become my daughter-in-law, I want to be someone you can rely on, not someone you fear." Emily couldn't speak at first, only nodded through tears. Back at the Brooks estate, Walter smiled when he heard the news. "A family isn't built on blood or wealth," he told Ethan later that evening. "It's built on understanding, and today, your mother took the first step." Emily had found her place, not through status, but through kindness, strength, and grace. And finally, the Brooks family was whole. The morning of the wedding dawned with a golden glow that stretched across the city skyline like a promise. For once, the headlines in the business journals and gossip columns were in agreement: Ethan Brooks to marry the woman who changed everything. In a world obsessed with wealth, influence, and image, this story had captured the nation's heart. Emily Thompson, the kind-hearted young woman from modest beginnings, was about to become the wife of one of America's most eligible bachelors. But more importantly, she was marrying the man who had seen her for who she truly was. The ceremony was held in a historic cathedral just outside the city. It had stood for over 120 years, its arched stained glass windows casting kaleidoscopic light across the stone floors. The guest list was a mix of high society figures, family friends, and a few unexpected attendees, like the taxi driver who had once driven Mr. Walter home, now sitting proudly in the back pew. Emily wore a custom-made ivory gown with lace sleeves and a sweeping train, simple but elegant, just like her. Her hair was pinned back in soft curls, and around her neck rested a delicate sapphire brooch, a Brooks family heirloom, passed down from generation to generation. It had been given to her by Walter that very morning. "This belongs to the woman who will carry our family's legacy," he'd said with misty eyes, gently fastening it to her gown. Ethan stood waiting at the altar, his tailored tuxedo impeccable, but his expression soft and completely focused on her. When the music began, and Emily appeared at the end of the aisle, his breath caught, and so did everyone else's. The girl who had once folded scarves in the corner of a boutique now walked with quiet confidence, her eyes filled with emotion. As she approached him, Ethan whispered, "You take my breath away." The ceremony was intimate and deeply personal. Walter gave a short reading from 1 Corinthians 13, a passage about love that resonated with everyone in the room, especially those who had loved and lost, and learned to love again. "I've lived a long time," Walter said, looking at the couple. "And I can tell you, true love doesn't shout. It shows up, quietly, when no one else does. Like Emily did for me that day in the boutique." Tears shimmered in Catherine Brooks' eyes as she reached for a handkerchief, yes, one of Emily's, now passed along like a small blessing. When the vows were spoken and the kiss sealed their union, the church erupted into applause. Outside, a horse-drawn carriage, Emily's only request, waited to take them to the reception. She had grown up watching old romantic movies with her mother, and this, she'd once said, was her someday dream. As they rode away, hand in hand, laughter and flower petals filling the air, Emily looked at Ethan and said, "How did we get here?" He smiled, brushing a curl from her cheek. "By being exactly who we were meant to be." And just like that, a girl who once gave her last dollar to help a stranger found everything she never dared to wish for: a partner, a family, and a future full of love.